Okay, so these are the five V's that we consider in the model V for the big data concept. Let's take a quick look at what each V stands for. අපි සාමාන්‍යයෙන් big data කියන සංකල්පය හඳුනා ගනිද්දී big data වල තියෙන අපි කියන විවිධ features අපි V අකුරෙන් පටන් ගන්න වචන පහකින් හඳුනා ගන්නවා. Right? So these are the five terms. Variety is one thing. Variety means obviously different types of data, right? Then velocity means the speed at which data can be processed, the data production, data processing speed. Then volume, that is the size of data. And veracity of data means the amount of how much the data can be reliable, right? How trustworthy the data is. So the final V refers to value. That means the worth that one can extract, the worth that can be gained by exploiting big data, right? By using big data. So when it comes to big data, we say the variety, the velocity is high, the variety is high, the volume of data is high, the veracity and the value is high, right? So in order for you to understand this concept even better, let me share a short video clip with you so that we explore the concept of big data with reference to a particular example in the hospital industry, in the medical field, right? So let me share that video with you now.
We all use smartphones, but have you ever wondered how much data it generates in the form of texts, phone calls, emails, photos, videos, searches, and music? Approximately 40 exabytes of data gets generated every month by a single smartphone user. Now, imagine this number multiplied by 5 billion smartphone users. That's a lot for our mind to even process, isn't it? In fact, this amount of data is quite a lot for traditional computing systems to handle. And this massive amount of data is what we term as big data. Let's have a look at the data generated per minute on the internet. 2.1 million snaps are shared on Snapchat. 3.8 million search queries are made on Google. 1 million people log on to Facebook. 4.5 million videos are watched on YouTube. 188 million emails are sent. That's a lot of data. So, how do you classify any data as big data? This is possible with the concept of 5 V's: volume, velocity, variety, veracity, and value. Let us understand this with an example from the healthcare industry. Hospitals and clinics across the world generate massive volumes of data. 2,314 exabytes of data are collected annually in the form of patient records and test results. All this data is generated at a very high speed, which attributes to the velocity of big data. Variety refers to the various data types, such as structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data. Examples include Excel records, log files, and X-ray images. Accuracy and trustworthiness of the generated data is termed as veracity. Analyzing all this data will benefit the medical sector by enabling faster disease detection, better treatment, and reduced cost. This is known as the value of big data. But how do we store and process this big data?
Sorry, I was on mute. So hope with that you got a better understanding about the concept of big data and this concept of 5 V's, right? So this particular video was actually produced several years back. So the statistics that they mentioned in that video have grown when it comes to the present context. But the idea of me sharing that video was for you to gain an understanding on what a vast concept the term big data carries, and you saw the amount of data that it can process, its processing capacity, capability, and all that, right? So you can understand based on that the impact that these concepts of big data and big data analytics can have on our day-to-day life. Right. So like I mentioned earlier, these recommender systems on Netflix and such, when you watch Netflix, for example, based on your past preferences to watch movies, you are suggested, no, based on a particular movie category that you have watched a lot, they suggest movie recommendations for you. So how do all of this happens? By processing a lot of a vast amount of data. What happens on YouTube, what happens on Google, it is customized to you, right? The results are customized to you, but the thought process behind this is data processing, data analytics, and predictive capabilities. Right. Then we move on to the concept of, to elaborate on the concept of open data, right? Which is equally important as big data. Now, in the context of development of the big data, a new idea of open data, or as regards government, data or as regards government data, open government data has emerged in recent years. So in parallel to this big data concept, another very important concept that is being talked about interchangeably is this concept of big data, right? The concept of big data. Now, this is mostly used in terminology in association with government data or public service, right? Now, what is Open Government Data or OGD? Open Government Data Initiative was developed with the aim of publicizing information resources created by public administration or at their request, as well as the free use and dissemination of open data by each citizen. So with the open data concept, an important area which emerged is this concept of open government data. With this open government data, what happened was information was publicized so that anyone can have access to information, excluding, of course, sensitive data. In the public administration service, free use and free dissemination of open data for every citizen was facilitated, right? Just like in Sri Lanka, no? So these kinds of initiatives you mostly see in other countries in the world with better access to technology. So the main reason behind for the mass publication of public administration databases, for example, is to provide software developers with the necessary information resources, provided that the applications created in this way will also publicly be available, right? So one of the key reasons why this public administration data were regarded to be, or were required to be in the form of mass publications was to, on one hand, give software developers with information resources that they required, right? So that they also had access to information in their career when they perform jobs. Now, the absence of availability of public sector data or this government related data is an issue, right? So not having readily available data. But with this OGD concept, the software developers also can have access to these kinds of data, right? Provided that the applications created in this way will also be publicly available, so that when software developers gain access to this kind of information, in turn they can create programs or software that benefit the public at large, right? Then software developers la ඕනේ මේ information publicize කරන්න නම් අපි programs create කරලා අපි public service එකක් දෙන්න නම් citizens ලට we have to create programs and deliver them. Now in Sri Lanka also we do have certain initiatives like that, right? Now in the Inland Revenue Department, if we take the for instance even the RMV now is developing that kind of an initiative, systematized initiative, and there are certain efforts to systematize the processes of certain public services, but also in the OGD concept, the idea is that free access to information is provided to public as much as possible. And so this was firstly initiated with the idea of giving the software developers who create these particular systems or programs for the benefit of the public, the access to those kinds of information, public government organizational information, so that in the long term, public at large can be benefited, right? So now I'm going to share with you a short video clip for you to understand this concept of open government data and how it can benefit citizens, right? In what kind of context having open access to or free access to government data can benefit people, right? This is just one example.
This is Andrew and Mary. Andrew just graduated from high school and wants to be a doctor. Mary is a professional doctor with many years of experience, but she's ready to retire and focus on her grandchildren. Andrew has chosen the university where he wants to study, but to be accepted there, he has to gather up all his tests and awards, a dozen or more documents and letters from various government agencies, and then trot over to the university with them to apply formally. After spending a good deal of time on all this, Andrew managed, but his enthusiasm for higher education has been dampened somewhat. Mary's story is exactly the same: documents, letters, and applications galore. And now, let's imagine a country in which all this information at government agencies is kept in one place, a state data center that is accessible to everyone 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. What would Andrew and Mary have to do then? Andrew would simply go to his chosen university's portal and with a single click let its admissions department know that he wanted to study medicine. The university itself would then gather all the information about Andrew that it needed from the state database. As to Mary, she would simply receive her pension at the right time without doing anything. These are just two small examples of the immense opportunity offered by open government data. Let's look at how this might work. Open government data is a massive accumulation of public information, including transport, financial, legal, social, and numerous other kinds of data that the government and its agencies collect over the years for their own use. According to Ukrainian law, any citizen can have access to this data by submitting the proper written query. However, what would happen if all this data were systemized, adapted to a single standard, and made accessible to all in automatic mode in one data center? This will automate most internal processes in government work and will establish more efficient interactions between the government and its citizens. This kind of approach will save the country millions of hryvnia, money that can go into stimulating economic growth instead. Ordinary Ukrainians will have the opportunity to turn to government offices for the necessary information or administrative services right from their own computers, phones, or tablets. More than 120 countries have already launched their own projects based on over 400,000 existing open databases. The overall macroeconomic effect of open access government data for European Union countries has been projected at 2% of additional GDP, or €206 billion by 2020. Easy access to open government data in a machine-readable format is an immense step for the benefit of independent developers. This means new opportunities for offering a huge number of programs and services to ordinary Ukrainians without involving the government. Successful services like this already operate in Ukraine, such as a map of the spread of crime, a mobile route planner for public transit, ratings of educational institutions based on the real success of their students, and much more. Open government data can completely alter the nature of government, making the work of state institutions transparent and under public scrutiny. Ordinary citizens can see what goes on behind government walls to monitor the spending of their tax money and, by extrapolation, control corruption right at the source. A greater level of information will allow the public and business to be properly involved in the process of rebuilding their country. The first steps towards this new world have already been taken in Ukraine. Using its international experience, Microsoft has joined forces with Social Boost, a civic platform, to set up at no cost a national open data portal called data.gov.ua, which, with the support of the Ukrainian government, open data has been collected in more than 12 categories. The next step for the government to take towards open data is to change legislation to ensure the publication of such data on an ongoing basis in real time. Together with Social Boost, Microsoft Ukraine has been encouraging developers to set up socially useful services based on open data by holding annual hackathon competitions. And this is just the beginning. Together, we can change the community and culture of our entire country. This
Right. So you saw a particular case of how open government data is being used in Ukraine, right? And how they are going to implement that kind of a project within their country to benefit the public at large. So you saw how this public availability and access to government data by the public at large can benefit them in different contexts, such as transportation, education, hospital, whatever it is. Having open access to data makes the life a lot easier for public in one way. Also, on the other hand, it makes government institutions transparent, and the publics, they have the ability of scrutinizing, or not scrutinizing, let's say they have the ability of monitoring, or let's say simply knowing what happens within these government institutions by having open access to data, right? Whether the public, the taxes they pay are being utilized in the right manner, right? So that's a great initiative which was implemented within Ukraine with collaboration with Microsoft and another Social Boost. Just one initiative that I wanted to share with you. So if we continue with our lesson here, taking into account the noticeable increase in this phenomenon, it therefore seems important to understand how OGD is used to develop commercial products and services, and what its value is for the creation of business models in terms of aiming to describe the architecture of value creation. So it is important as students who study management to understand how this concept of open government data can be used to develop certain commercial products and services. Now, we saw in the video also how developers can benefit by having access to open government data in creating useful applications that benefit the public. You saw several examples in that video also, which showed with the URL itself, the web URL also was indicated in the video. If you get free time, do visit these websites and see what happens within each of these programs, how the public can be benefited at large, right? So therefore, certain commercial products of value can be developed using the OGD, and also it has tremendous value for the creation of new business models in terms of delivering better value to different types of stakeholders. So that is what, as management students, you need to understand, also to think how this concept can be improved further in creating better business models, maybe in new business models, and also how this concept can be developed in terms of delivering better value to the involved stakeholders, right? What kind of products can be given birth to with reference to this concept. So that is a little bit of critical thinking and, intuitive thinking that you should have as fourth year undergraduates. So the core of business model being developed is to be able to access to the use of data, right? So the nature of business model that needs to be developed is to be able to access data and to be able to use data, right? So in the context of the development of network economy, a need to design network business models arises. So now we shift a little bit to the concept of network economy and network business model. So we talked about network economy at the beginning of this lecture series as well. So we are going to link this with business models now, right? So networking is said to emerge in three basic formats, right? Three basic formats. What are they? First, it can exist in analogical terms, where relationships between companies, organizations occur within the organizational sphere without technological involvement. Still, relationships occur between different organizations, right? In this case, a network solution can be a cluster of companies and supporting institution. Naturally, some companies can be, supporting each other in certain industries, which are, interdependent among each other. Right now, if we take the telecommunication industry, it is a highly networked case, but also there can be industries which coexist within one and coexist on one another, right? Which support each other, and which has relationships among them without having to have a large intervention of technology, or let's say a large intervention of networking, so to speak, right? Also, networks can have hybrid properties where inter-organizational relationships that we talk about can be supported by means of IT. Now, in analogical terms, we don't see technology supporting to maintain these relationships, right? No lot of technological involvement is seen. But in the present context, it's very rarely that we see networks where no any technological intervention is observed, right? Mostly what we see is hybrid formats, isn't it? So in hybrid formats, we see organizational relationships being facilitated by IT cooperation platforms, right? Used for the development of technology, communication, or the exchange of information and knowledge. Maybe in terms of certain collaborative platforms. Right now, for example, Microsoft platform is used by how many organizations, right? If we take this Office 365, how many organizations are using that platform for the purpose of collaborating, right? Maybe for the purpose of project management, maybe for the purpose of simply having meetings, for the purpose of working collaboratively on a certain product or service. The platforms created by certain technologies, right? IT platforms are being abundantly used in order to communicate and for the exchange of knowledge, right? Then the third format is in technological terms, where a network may be completely operationalized through communication between technical systems alone, right? So such a situation will concern interfaces between different e-business models, right? So if a purely technological system, two systems or several systems are interconnected with each other without having to have analogical terms or analogical format, we call that the existence in a purely technological term, right? Network existing in a purely technological term. Now, certain e-business models, e-business platforms, which operate without any physical, or let's say without any analog operation, right, can be seen, right, purely happening in a virtual environment, right? So those are the three formats in which networking may emerge in the business context. Now, for instance, in technological terms, there can be certain selling platforms, virtual intermediaries, right? Online intermediaries. There might be a selling platform. There might be an online intermediary interfacing the selling platform with, participants to certain transaction or interaction. There might be online marketing platforms, right? So likewise, sometimes in terms of technological terms, your e-business models could be networked with each other. Now, for example, if we take these travel booking scenarios and all, these kinds of networks we can observe. So, moving on. So Jablonski and Jablonski defined the following attributes of the network business model. So we are now going to look at a few attributes of a network business model. One thing, a business model does not exist without a network, right? It does not exist without a network. Then some components of business models depend on activity in the network, right? Now that means value proposition for customers may depend on the nature of the network. If we take the social media network, it is different from that of a telecommunication network. So the value proposition could be different from each other, right? From business model to model. Then a business model is based on cooperation from the company with a minimum of one partner. At least one component of the business model must integrate with another model. So there should be at least one component of your business model that is being integrated with another business model. And of course, the business model should be based on the cooperation of the company with at least one single partner, right? Development of the business model depends on the development of other business models. Now that is important in a network economy. We say that the business models depend on each other, right? So if one business model develops, all the models that are connected to them have the ability to grow and develop as well, right? So they depend on each other, right? So those are few attributes identified by Jablonski and Jablonski in terms of network business model, right? Then we look at the graphical model of network business models by Palo and Tartinen. Here it speaks of several elements of the network business model, which are shown in three different levels, right? Business net development, business opportunity development, and business model development, right? So now simply when we learn about the network business model, right, the idea is that it is a business model where maybe two or more, several stakeholders create a joint value proposition or jointly affect a value proposition based on the key activities and resources that are prevalent within those business models for all stakeholders, right? So this initial development phase that is shown by Palo and Tartinen in the business net development phase, that is the initial development phase here targets the technology itself and potential applications that the technology can have, right? So now in this phase, what happens is often science and research efforts are undertaken by organizations, right? Then actors establish and they enter the net or the network with or the parties of this exercise, they enter the net with firm specific business models or individual business models that they have within their individual firms, right? So there are many possible business opportunities that can arise in a network business model. So these firm level business models, when they combine together in the initial phase, they provide a basis for identifying those opportunities in the future. Now, several organizations with their individual firm business models may be combining with each other, right? Connecting with each other in order to build a net, right? That is what happens in this for the business net development phase. Several actors, they come together with their individual firm level business models, right? And they look at how science and research and how technology can be integrated, how they can be utilized in order to create opportunities, right? Then the opportunity identification phase comes, right? Business opportunity development. So this happens at the net level or the network level, and it is based on firm level business model that previously identified, that each other previously identified. So in the opportunity identification, it may include the infrastructure and certain applications as well, right? Infrastructural requirements as well as application of certain technologies or initiatives to certain practical contexts. So the opportunities identified here relate to the research potential and also learning, technology integration. It may be in terms of standardization of technologies. It may be in terms of integration of several technologies, right? It can be in terms of changing of existing business models and for the benefit of the customers and various stakeholders associated. And also opportunities could be in terms of new ways of using existing technology. Likewise, the opportunities identified could vary, right? But the foundation for this opportunity identification is actually provided at the initial stage, business net development stage, right? So next, opportunity development happens. Then the initial development phase targets technology itself and its the potential applications of that. So this task is often conducted by a net of research organizations, as we identified earlier. Then it moves on to opportunity identification stage, right? Based on the research done, based on the scientific studies that were done, right? Observations that were done, they come up with opportunity identification. Then we evolve to a network business model, right? Where another business model development happens. So first we develop our network, then we develop business opportunities, then we move on to developing our business model, which we refer to as networked business model. So by this phase, already firms have got together, there is a network in operation, and also using this network, a business model is created, right? A net level business model in other terms, right? So here the role of the infrastructure is very important in the development of the business model, and it affects the business model of the services, right? And it affects the nature of services as well. And in another important aspect in developing the business model is to be able to define the benefit that these services can offer over the existing technology-based services that are presently observed, right? When developing these new business models, it is important to become, well-versed or to have a good idea with the markets, regarding the markets and also the customer segments that we are going to target. So that is how the evolution of a network business model happens. And actually these, rather than an evolution, I would say these are the elements of a network business model, the stages in which it happens, right? So then moving forward, we move to a new area, 5.3, assumptions of digital sharing economy business models. Now here, the digital economy is something that is largely based on the principles of network of links, right? This network economy largely talks about digital economy, and it talks about the links between market players, where communication platforms shape the potential to effectively deliver the proposed value to customers, right? So communication platforms have a large effect on how value is delivered to customers who are the users of those particular platforms, right? Platforms play a very important role. These platforms are also fully designed to build a community of supporters who should foster the monetization of business models after some time. Not only delivering value and deciding who is going to use the platform and who are the users of the platform, these communication platforms are also designed in such a way that they have the ability of building another community that supports these platforms and who are usually investing in or who promote the monetization of these business models, or let's say how the entire monetization process within these business models are happening after some time, right? So examples of such business models of companies that are using the sharing economic concept have been included here. There are so many, we have only included a few. So this Uber is something that is very familiar to you. Then there is BlaBlaCar. We don't say that here in Sri Lanka, but it's a very interesting concept. But you know, I will explain to you, or I will show you a small video clip of how BlaBlaCar works. But I saw recently PicMe doing initial sort of survey and also having an idea of implementing this concept of BlaBlaCar, where people get to carpool, right? Carpooling concept where a single ride can be shared by multiple people, right? Multiple parties. And then there's Zipcar, there's financeover.pl, skill trade. So this financeover.pl or financeover.pl, it's a crowdfunding platform observed in Poland. So you can refer to their website. They have an English translated version of their website and see how that happens. And the Skill Trade is an e-learning web portal, right? Visit these websites and see what you can learn from these platforms as well, right? So the sharing economy is widely discussed in the relevant literature, and many authors interpret this concept differently. Right? There are interchangeable ideas. Given below are few definitions pertaining to the sharing economy. Right? So there are so many. Just for the purpose of providing you a better understanding of the concept of sharing economy, we have included this here. So the sharing economy can be defined as consumers granting each other temporary access to underutilized physical assets, possibly for money. So it's very important here for you to understand consumers are granting access to assets for other consumers. What kind of access is this? It's a temporary access, not a full-time access, a temporary access. And the nature of the assets that are being shared are underutilized in nature, or there is an idle capacity for these assets. And possibly there could be an exchange of money. If somebody possesses an asset which is underutilized or which can be utilized by someone else, rather than just keeping it to themselves, they tend to share it with another consumer who has the need of consuming that asset they have. That is the basic idea of the sharing economy. So then the second definition, right? The on-demand or sharing economy is a term that describes digital platforms that connect consumers to a service or commodity through the use of a mobile application or website, right? So the sharing economy or on-demand economy is a term that is used to describe digital platforms, right? Platforms that have the ability of connecting consumers to a certain commodity. We talked about commodity at the beginning of the lecture series. You may remember. How is this connection happening? Through the use of a mobile application or a website. right? So when we look at the examples of the digital sharing economy models in the coming sections, you will understand this concept better. So in the sharing economy, roles are assigned to three entities that create triadic B2B platform relationship. So we will take a look at who are those three entities that we commonly observe in the sharing economy in the next slide. So these, who are the three parties? There are service enablers such as Uber, right? Airbnb, Booking.com in Sri Lanka, right? Then Looks, you can look upon this on the internet and so on. And there are service providers, right? People who provide the service that are enabled by the platforms such as Uber and Airbnb. Who are the service providers? They can be drivers. In the case of Airbnb, they can be the home owners or the hosts in homes, right? The ones who provide homes for other people to stay. And there are customers, right? No, sorry, I mentioned earlier Booking.com, but actually it cannot be taken under this very this sharing economy landscape, right? Now we don't see a case where in Sri Lanka it utilized to an underutilized home being given for another person to stay, not that much, right? But Airbnb is a good example. Then the third party we identify is the customers. Who are the customers now in the Uber platform, or whether it's the Airbnb? It can be passengers who ride the vehicles, the guests who come to stay in the home shared by another person. So a customer here may come from the B2B context or the B2C context, both. Can be a firm, customer can be a firm, or customer can also be an individual person, right? B2B means business to business, B2C, as you all know, business to consumer context. Then figure 3.6 shows the relationship between the actors constituting the structure of the sharing economy business model. So we'll see how these actors are interconnected with each other. As I told you, there are service providers, service enablers, and there are customers. So now this service enabler creates the platform, right? They create the platform, and then a payment goes from them to the service providers after commission, right? Payment after commission. Then the customer pays the platform owners or the service enablers when they place the order, right? When they place the order, the payment is received by them, and based on that, after commission, payment is provided to from the platform to the service provider. So when the service provision happens this way, the service provider provides the service to the customer, right? Then in turn, after consuming the service, the customer, both the customer and the service provider, provides a feedback to the service enabler, right? So this is how the sharing economy business model works, right? The sharing economy business model works this way. So you should be able to explain how a model works using a practical scenario or a practical example, right? Based on the information given, also you can very easily build a case. You have to have the ability of explaining how these each actors interact with one another in the sharing economy business model, right? So moving ahead, this approach emphasizes the role of partnerships in the creation of value, which should be sustainable so as to maintain the consistency of the business model, as well as synergy between the expectations and need of the partners. So when using the sharing economy approach, right, it focuses a lot on the role of different partnerships in the process of value creation, right? Different parties getting together to create value to each other. So it has to be sustainable for it to be successful. The business model has to have a continuity and also have to be able to maintain the consistency of the business model, right? It cannot break down. So there should be service provision, there should be people to obtain the service, there should be enough properties to be rented out, enough vehicles to be rented out, there should be service providers, the technological platform should be stable, as well as enough people should be willing to consume the services as well. There should be consistency in this process, as well as synergy between the expectations and needs of the partners. What the business platform wants, what the service provider wants, and what the customer wants. There have to be a connection between their expectancies, and there should be their expectations should be balanced to each other, right? So if this partnership is not preserved, right, if one partner takes more benefit than the others out of the transaction, right, if some participants in the business model achieve more favorable conditions, then these models cannot survive, right? They will lose their effectiveness and they will lose their efficiency. For example, if the technological platform gains a lot of profit without providing sufficient value to the travelers or the persons who stay in homes, then the customers won't be willing to stay. At the same time, if the service providers are not paid a sufficient commission for the service they provide, they will not be willing to provide their properties for other people to stay. So there had to be a good balance between all three parties in order for this model to survive well. Therefore, the application of sustainable business model archetypes can successfully improve the balance between organizational, human, and technological aspects. So, for a sustainable business model of this manner, right, it can give birth to improve the balance between various elements such as organizational, human, and technological aspects, right? So the next table, which we will be looking at in our next lecture, we will be emphasizing on a few examples of business models that are commonly observed in the sharing economy business model, right? We will be looking at that in the next lecture, and we will be explaining to you how these different models work, right? So hope you understood the content discussed today. So with that, we would like to conclude today's lecture. We talked about many new concepts. We talked about how the the sharing economy works, right? How the new economy works, and we introduced the concept of open data. We talked about big data and open government data, and we talked about the concept of how network business models exist, and also features of network business model, how the elements of network business model are combined together, and the assumptions of certain sharing economy business models. We provided certain examples, and we are in the middle of discussing about this sharing economy business models. So the next day we will talk in detail about certain sharing economy business models with examples, right? So thank you very much for participating for today's lecture. We'll see you on the other day. Stay safe, everyone, and take care.